Welcome back to the Skylanders Spyro's Adventure developer commentary. Today we're going to dive into the many differences of the 3DS version with Vicarious Visions' lead scripter, Ben Frost. So you were the lead scripter on the 3DS version of Skylanders Spyro's Adventure. What exactly does that entail?
So scripter tends to mean someone who, handles scripting, which is kind of a halfway point between programming and design. It's like simpler coding, if you will. But someone who's a scripter tends to have good programming skills as well as design skills. So they can also be known as a technical designer. If you see that terminology, it's sort of the same thing. But yeah, for that project, as the lead scripter, I was kind of overseeing all the decisions and things and leading the efforts around systems and building systems for the game. In that particular example, we were porting Skylanders, or at least that was the original plan. It was to port Skylanders, Spyro's Adventure, to the 3DS from console. And so there was a monumental effort to do that, and I led the charge on that.
So what went wrong to make it not be portable?
So we knew up front that it wasn't going to be there are a lot of unknowns where something that's built for console, obviously the 3DS is a less powerful device, and because of the 3D effect, when you render, you have to render twice because you're rendering from two camera angles that are slightly different, which gives you that 3D effect. So we knew ahead of time that we might run into some issues, knowing that when the game was built, it was built specifically for. Luckily, the lowest end console it was built for was Wii, so it wasn't a huge stretch. It wasn't like they were building for, PS3 or something, and that was it. So that helped a little bit, but we knew going in that we'd have to, we'd run into some hurdles and challenges with that. So we had what we ran into was that as our engineers were getting this up and running on the platform, we finally got that to work and came to discover that the game ran at 1 frame per second, which is far from the target.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Did you ever get it to run better than that?
So a little bit. I believe we didn't spend too long trying to get that to run. I think 5 or 6 was the best we could do, just with that initial effort. But knowing that our decision basically was, okay, we can either continue to try to optimize what's here, but the concern is that how much would we have to cut out or simplify things to get it to run at the target frame rate. And the worry is that at some point there is some crucial system that we're going to have to break apart, that could then be something we have to rebuild anyway, because there's only so far you can optimize something before it just has to be redone.
Yeah. How long were you attempting to fix the frame rate?
So there was kind of a 2-prong effort. Engineers were working hard at work on trying to do the best they could on the programming side to get things to run quickly, get it running on the hardware, and get the best performance. While we, the rest of the team, mostly designers, were working to there was an initial effort to understand all of the logic that was written for the console and how it all worked and all of those things. And then there was effort on that side to try and simplify some of the things they had done, because there were certain complexities in certain systems that we really didn't need for the game we were going to build on the 3DS.
The game ultimately ended up changing because of this. How long was that development for the new version?
I'm not going to remember exactly, but it was around 6 months of development with a full team. It was There were a few team members that started out alone doing some research before then, but once we had the full team of, I believe it was around 20-ish people, it was about 6 months of development, I'd say, before we had to wrap it up and get it ready.
That's crazy. I don't think people can quite comprehend how small that is.
Yeah, you're only working, well, there were some exceptions where, as needed, we have our deadlines, we have everything we want to do in this game we want to build, and then your production is essentially setting deadlines and saying, all right, if the whole game has to be done by this date, then here's what we need done by this date, so that we can fix bugs and whatnot. And that's where all your milestones come from that are like, all right, here are set concrete dates that we think are roughly accurate in terms of when we need to be done with things so that we can hit that target. And so that's kind of where crunch comes from a little bit. And we did have a little bit. It wasn't too bad, but I think for two reasons. One, we managed it decently, but also it's hard when you're very passionate about something to like give it up and go home.
Yeah.
So when one of those deadlines is coming and we know it has to be great, it has to be awesome, and these are the things that we want to get in, and so there were some late nights into the wee hours of the morning that we're up, and that's sometimes where some of the fun stories from game development come from, where everyone's so tired that silly things start to happen. But
I've got a question about that later, so excellent. So how closely did you work with Toys for Bob in regards to this? Because obviously the game had to drastically change.
Yeah, so in general, Toys for Bob is great. We worked very closely with them, and depending on the area, we were either constantly communicating with them, or sometimes it was just an upfront knowledge dump. Like their tools, we use their tools to build the game for 3DS. Their same tools, so that was a lot of effort up front of talking to them and working with them to try and understand how the tools work, how to use them, how the logic works in the console, how all that was built. So that effort was mostly up front, and then after that, once we have that knowledge, we're good. But things like the toys and the portal and anything else, like the toys were continually in development, I think, up until, because there's so many, up until launch. So there was, or at least up until the manufacturing of the cartridges. So there was constant communication about those and all the little iterations of. That is actually probably a whole talk in itself that I don't have a ton of knowledge on, but there were people specifically dedicated to working with the toys and trying to make them look as great and authentic as possible in terms of on par with the characters in the game, but also trying to make them, affordable to produce. So they have all these paint passes where each pass you have to make with a different color on the toy has a certain cost associated with it. So if you have too many different colors, the toy becomes too costly. So you have to make decisions there about how to make it look good without blowing the budget.
What influenced the decisions to change the gameplay? Because the console version, it doesn't have a jump button, whereas this version it does. Was there any reason? Was it easier to develop that way, or?
So the moment we knew we were going to be rebuilding all of the systems for the game was kind of a exciting moment, because at that moment it's like, all right, we're gonna have to rebuild everything anyway, so we might as well make a game that actually fits better with the console we're developing for. And in particular, the 3DS has the 3D effect, the cool 3D feature with the little slider you can adjust. And we wanted to make something that would show that off really well. So we wanted a game that, one, in the console game, the player can control the camera. And that makes it really hard to do 3D things well when you don't know where the camera is going to be. So we wanted to land on a game where the user didn't control the camera. We controlled the camera. It's also a less powerful device, so we needed to go with levels that were a little more linear and longer and less open world. in a sense, less big areas. So immediately, the thing that comes to mind is, like a Crash Bandicoot level, something that you just traverse through, and so that was both a combination of the hardware limitations and the fact that we had a chance, that we had to make something different from the technical side. And then we're all excited about that because, whenever you're being creative, creating something new is always exciting versus just copying what someone else has done.
Was that the same reason you decided to create a different villain as well?
So the villain, I think, was driven by the fact that this was the first game. There weren't really hard rules necessarily about the Skylanders universe, and no one really knew if this was going to pick up and take off anyway, or if it was just going to flop and then it wouldn't go much further. But there was, they were pretty open about what would happen in the universe, but also Chaos was the main villain in the console version, and just in case we didn't want to do anything weird that wouldn't make sense, later on, so we could continue the story. So having a different villain allowed us to say that this took place not in a different universe, but in a different part of the universe in a different time period, where we didn't have to worry about what we did with the villain because it wouldn't conflict with anything about Chaos's background or past in the future. So we could write whatever we wanted and do whatever we wanted with the villain and not really worry about constraining future desires that Toys for Bob would have with, this is what Chaos used to do. And
yeah, that makes sense. In regards to the portal is a much smaller device and works a little bit differently. As I presume it's because it's for the 3DS, it wants to be a little bit more portable.
Yeah, so the console version, those portals were a little bit large, a little bit bulky, and we didn't need it to be that big to fit the number of Skylanders that could be in the game at once. This was, of course, before Giants. I do not believe you can fit two. I have to check, but I believe there are 2 Giants that are large enough that they fit, but not perfectly on the 3DS portal. But yeah, the goal was to make something smaller, more portable, because the 3DS is portable. You don't want something bulky that you're carrying around. In addition, it would have to be running on batteries, obviously, and there was a little bit of hardware redesign so that you could get a little bit more battery life, I believe, out of it. Because if you're carrying around and want it portable, you don't want to be carrying 100 batteries with you.
Yeah, of course.
Which is also not environmentally responsible. So, yeah, that drove basically those. That is what drove the decisions around the portal and what was done with it. Is it has to be portable, which means we want it to be a little bit smaller. Needs to run on battery power, and then that sort of drove everything related to any of the hardware design decisions.
Do you have a favorite Skylander?
Do I have a favorite Skylander? That's a good question. I personally don't like favorites in anything.
That's fair.
But there are a lot of really good ones. I think of the original cast, I would say Gil Grunt. To be honest.
Yeah, Gil Grunt's
having the water gun keep enemies at bay, and then having that nice ranged attack work really well. And I know the movesets evolved in the later games, and he got more powers, but he was a pretty solid character in the first one.
So outside of what you've mentioned from development so far, what would you say were the biggest challenges?
The biggest challenge really had to do with the scope of the game, I guess, and meaning we had a small team. We had 6 months, which isn't a very long time, and we have to build and deliver something in that amount of time. So it always happens that when we're talking about a game and what could be really cool, we come up with all these ideas and all these crazy different things that we would love to build. And that's great, and that's usually how we start. What are all these awesome things that we would want to do? And then we have to come back to reality and say, all right, with the team that we have, the resources we have, and the time that we have, what can we build? Can we take one of these others' ideas and pare it down a little bit and make something solid, or are any of these ideas going to fit? And so the hardest part, I think, is just that process of taking an idea or taking several ideas and refining them down to something that is going to fit, that you can get done in time.
And going back to the 6 months thing, like in contrast, I think the console version had 3 years. Like, how other projects you've worked on, how long did they take?
So that a longer time period tends to be the case with newer IP or something that hasn't been done before. I know that in the case with Tours for Bob, when you're trying to make a new game or you come up with different ideas, it's sort of like the Wild West, and it takes time to get through and try them out and say, okay, let's build this prototype, and then you play around with it, and let's build this one. And sometimes they're just cool ideas that you've had in the past that you want to try out, or sometimes it's looking at the market and identifying an opportunity, saying, like I don't actually recall where the Toys to Life idea came from. I'm sure I could hit up Paul Ritchie or someone else, and they would gladly tell me this was the aha moment. But that does take time to find something that you think is worthy of gamers, essentially. Because we have a lot of cool ideas, but some of them are very similar to things that are out there, and it's hard to get something that is innovative and new and different. And I know, especially in this example, it created this whole Toys to Life genre. It was a bold new idea, and it took a little bit of time to, not only land on this idea, but then prototype it and mess around with some hardware. And I know that was Robert Leyland spent a lot of time working on that to get that right. And so that's why something, usually the newer IP games, take longer up front. And then because when we came on to say, all right, hey, we're going to do the 3DS version, they already had a playable game and all this story and like everything already figured out. So we could just take that universe that's already defined and say, all right, let's build something that lives in this universe. And so a lot of the hard part is already figured out in that sense.
What would you say was your favorite part of development?
The team. So there's a lot of really great people in game development, but sometimes depending on leadership styles and personalities and things like that, sometimes it's a little harder to work in different situations. And I think this team really was great in the sense that everyone was very, I mean, you would hope everyone is always like this, but everyone was very kind to each other. Everyone was very, it felt like a family in a sense. We were, even though we were there late some nights, we'd still joke around with each other. And sometimes, when heated discussions happen, everybody knows it's just, we're just trying to come up with the best thing for the game. And at the end of the day, we can still go out and have a drink with each other, and it's all good. But I think that was the most fun, especially because everyone kept an arsenal of Nerf guns at their desk, and after a certain hour, that became common to start a war.
Oh, that's great to hear. Maybe not the Nerf gun war, but the camaraderie and the great atmosphere. That's always great.
Yeah, and it is always fun too. I think the other part that's great is like the Skylanders universe is a wonderful fantasy universe. Like there's so many different cool characters and environments and enemies and things like that. And you don't always get the opportunity, as a developer, to work on something that tickles your imagination so much. Like the creativity is just off the charts. Anything goes within the universe. It's completely okay to have a turtle that, I don't know, a turtle loading rocks into a cannon, and you're like, oh yeah, that's totally normal.
given that it was such a small development cycle, there might not have been many changes. But what would you say is the biggest change within the game from how it ended up in the final product?
So I think the biggest thing probably was the introduction of Hector as a timer. I think the time pressure, it's complete levels, and I think that was also one of the most hotly debated things on the team about, we were trying to come up with solutions for different things, and that ended up being one of them. But that changed the game a lot, I think, in terms of how it felt in the end. That in the beginning there was no time pressure, and it was a little bit more. It wasn't as fast paced. Like it was Crash Bandicoot in the levels when you're just jumping around and exploring. It wasn't Crash Bandicoot when you're running from the boulder.
Yeah,
and it definitely shifted more towards that.
So, you mentioned that at I guess the crunch time things get funny or weird. Yeah, what would you say is the weirdest or funniest thing that happened during development?
I'm not actually going to be able to remember.
That's totally fair.
It was 9 years ago. It was a little bit too far.
What have you worked on since working on Skylanders?
So after the 3DS version of Skylanders, I decided, and this was more of a life decision, where I was at working at Vicarious Visions is in upstate New York, and that's about an hour from where I grew up. So I hadn't really gone too far in terms of where I lived. And so I made a life decision I want to move somewhere very far away from where I grew up. So I actually went to work for Toys for Bob, which is out on the West Coast versus the East Coast of the US. And then I continued to work on pretty much every subsequent Skylanders title I worked on, except for Superchargers. So I went out with Toys for Bob, continued to work on all the Skylanders games, and then after Imaginators, the last Skylanders game, I left Toys for Bob and moved. I'm now on the East Coast, and I live in Florida at the moment. And I worked for EA Tiburon for a little while, working on the Madden games. So I worked on Madden for console, and then worked on Madden Mobile, free-to-play game, for a couple years. And then recently left there, and I'm actually now in the process of relocating to the Pacific Northwest.
Oh wow, so you've done quite a lot then.
Yeah, and it just keeps going.
Which Madden game was it?
So I worked on, specifically for the console, I worked on Madden 18, and then for mobile, I worked on Madden Overdrive, and then the latest Madden Mobile 20.
And were you a scripter for the Madden games as well?
No. So it's actually very different how that studio works compared to, and this is highly dependent on tools and culture and a lot of those things. But Toys for Bob has a tool that exposes low-level power, a lot of low-level power to its content creators. So as a designer, engineers kind of just build a base tool that allows us to do everything. They don't do a lot of the game creating work for us at Toys for Bob anyway. And so I'd say they had about 10 engineers that made a tool, and then, many content creators that could use it. So the save game system, the checkpoint system, the camera system, all of that is built by content creators or scripters essentially in the tools, not built by engineers. Whereas at other studios, that could be very different. Like when I was working on the Madden games at EA Tiburon, everything is built by engineers. So what that looks like is designers more. So I worked on Madden NFL 18 as a senior designer, and you were doing less what I would call hands-on building work and a lot more theoretical design work. And that game is also very UI intensive, so I ended up doing a lot of mock-ups and prototypes of UI flows and things like that. But that was less hands-on work and more theoretical work and everything on paper.
That's really cool.
And then, and then shifting into on Madden Overdrive, I was also a senior designer in title, but on that project and the following project, I worked as the creative lead, which is it's a similar role in terms of day-to-day work, but a lot more working with leadership and executives about what are our goals and our timelines and things like that, because the deadlines are a lot tighter on a yearly release. Something that has to come out and align with football season, as opposed to, Skylanders, which can come out whenever we're ready.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear about. It's interesting how different it is amongst studios, where you wouldn't necessarily know that if you aren't part of part of the industry.
Yeah, and it makes a huge difference. I mean, I think my preferred tool set, and it is Unreal Engine 4, and that is it's what I've always used. It's actually how I got my start in the industry. For fun, I was building, and this was way back in the original Unreal tournament, and the original Unreal before that. They had the tool set shipped with the game, and so I used to build multiplayer maps in Unreal Tournament, and that was essentially my portfolio for getting into the industry.
Ah, interesting. On that note, I guess the final question is, what advice do you have for people looking to enter the industry?
So there are actually a few different ways. Nowadays, back when I went to school, there weren't any programs or degrees for designing and making games. There were just starting to be some classes, but it wasn't actually like a career or degree you could get. So if you are going to school, there are a lot of good schools out there that have gaming degrees. And I don't specifically know which ones are the best. I'd have to do your research there, but that is one avenue, is to actually go get a degree doing that. And a lot of those schools, and similar to my school, I went to RPI in upstate New York, and they had a program there where you do basically an internship. So I think it's the second half of your junior year in college, whatever industry you want to get into. The school has connections with different companies, and so you get to go and work at a company in the industry you want to work in. And that is how I got into games. I didn't actually know that it was a profession. I've been playing games my whole life, but I didn't realize I could actually do it for a living as a job. And so I found out about it through that program and ended up doing an internship. I mean, you still have to apply, and they have to, there's still an interview process, which is where my multiplayer maps I built in Unreal came in handy. But that's how I ended up working in games, and then realized I really liked it. And after you getting your foot in the door like that and work at a company, unless you're doing things really terribly, that's an easy way to get in through a degree program as well. And then the other way that is also pretty common is a lot of games there have Unreal Engine is one of the examples out there, but a lot of games have tool sets that give you the ability to mod them. So modding games and whatnot is another form of development. You're taking something someone's created and creating something new for it, new features, some new content, having some sort of portfolio that you're creating or something you're working on. The key is just that you're interested in games, you're working on building things in games, and you can show that, because passion is the biggest thing. Usually you're going to want somebody in this industry if this isn't what you want to do. This isn't a 9-to-5 day job where you're just collecting a paycheck. I mean, it is for some people, but that's not who you're really looking for. You're looking for people that really want to build games and really love it, because then they're not only are they going to enjoy it more, but they're going to create better games.
Like, talking about the mods and creating stuff with Unreal, Media Molecule's Dreams, do you think that's going to be a good gateway for people, sort of learn how to use a tool set and create levels or games with that and add that for a portfolio.
I'm just looking at a little bit now, just briefly, some screenshots and other things, and it looks pretty cool. But it is really exciting to be able to, because if you think way back when games started, you needed to understand programming to accomplish anything, and now we have these great tools and great things that people are creating that allow anyone to come in and start, exploring their imagination and creativity and creating games. And so being able to have tools that are really usable that more people can use, we end up with more and better and more interesting content out there. So yeah, that looks like it could be pretty cool.
Well, thank you so much for being part of this. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to speak to you about your work on not just the original game, but your work at EA and
in general, all the rest of the game work I've done. Yeah, and I can if you have any other questions, feel free to let me know, and you can touch base with me anytime. We'll see where I end up next.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to hear about, and it's astonishing that you had such a small amount of time to make the 3DS version, and that it's a good, solid game. Like the fact that it's a tangible thing is so impressive.
Yeah, I think that really is a testament. I mean, not only to the team, but the tools as well. The tools we were using were really good that allowed us to prototype and create really quickly. And I think that combination of things is very powerful.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, share the video around. I also have a Twitch, a Twitter, and a Patreon if you would like to support me and the channel. As you can probably tell, this is a massive passion project of mine that I've been working on for quite some time, and I'm really glad that I'm able to get it out to you, and I'm really grateful for you watching the video. If you want to see more from the series or other stuff that I do on this channel, click that notification bell to be notified when I upload next. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.